An experienced pilot was commanding a packed intercontinental flight when alert systems began firing. Fuel was running out much faster than predicted. With hundreds of lives under his responsibility and an imposing mountain range blocking the emergency route, he had to make decisions that defied all protocols. Nobody at the control tower believed him when he reported the real situation. What seemed impossible was happening at 36,000 feet. You know that moment when you look at your instruments and your brain simply refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. When every passing second, the impossible situation becomes even more impossible. Well, I was exactly there, with 418 souls depending on decisions that no procedure manual could predict. What happened that night changed forever the way I see this profession, and you're about to discover why. My name is Richard, and I've been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years. I've accumulated over 15,000 flight hours, crossed oceans in storms, faced mechanical failures and emergency landings. I always believed that experience and training were enough to handle any situation, until that October night, when everything I learned would be tested in a way I never imagined. It was a transcontinental night flight, departing from Sao Paulo, bound for a major hub in Europe. My co-pilot, Tyler, had 10 years of experience and was meticulous with procedures. Our aircraft was a Boeing 777-300ER, one of the most reliable in the world, configured to transport up to 450 passengers. That night we had 418 people on board. The cabin was practically full. Families returning home, executives on business trips, students starting study abroad programs. Every occupied seat represented a life, a story, someone waiting at some airport on the other side of the Atlantic. The pre-flight check went without abnormalities. Fuel calculated with safety margin, favorable weather conditions, all systems working perfectly. We took off punctually at 11:15 p.m. and the initial climb was smooth. Passengers were already beginning to relax, some sleeping, others watching movies. The cabin crew initiated the onboard service. It was an apparently ordinary night, one of those where you fulfill your mission almost on autopilot, trusting in the well-established routine. But aviation has a cruel characteristic. It harshly punishes those who trust too much in routine. We were about 3 hours into the flight, already over the Atlantic, when I noticed the first anomaly. It wasn't anything dramatic initially, just the fuel gauges showing consumption slightly above expected. "Tyler, are you seeing this?" I asked, pointing to the instruments. He checked, reviewed the calculations on the flight computer. "We're burning about 5% more than planned," he confirmed, frowning. "Could be headwinds stronger than forecasted." Made sense. We adjusted altitude, optimized speed, reported to the company via data link. The response was standard. Continue monitoring. 15 minutes later, consumption had increased another 10%. Now we had a real problem. I mentally reviewed all possibilities. Leak? Unlikely, there were no alerts. Engine failure? Parameters were normal. Sensor error? We had redundant systems all confirming the same reading. "Richard, by my calculations, if this continues, we won't make it to destination," Tyler said, and for the first time I heard tension in his voice. He was right. I did the calculations 2-3 times. With current consumption and remaining fuel quantity, we'd run out while still over the ocean. The nearest alternate airport was in the Azores, but even to get there the margin was tight. "Tower, this is commercial flight code, omitted, requesting authorization for diversion to alternate airport. We have an abnormal fuel consumption situation," I transmitted, keeping my voice calm and professional. The European tower's response took a few seconds. "Flight omitted. Confirm nature of emergency. Are all systems functional?" "Affirmative, tower. Systems operational, but fuel consumption critical. Request direct vector to alternate." While waiting for authorization, I looked at the navigation map. The route to the Azores would take us over an area of adverse weather conditions. Not ideal, but it was our best option. Or at least that's what I thought. Flight omitted. Authorization denied for alternate. Oceanic Center reports heavy traffic and severe weather conditions en route. Maintain current heading and continue reporting. I felt my stomach tighten. Denying a diversion request for abnormal fuel consumption? This was serious. "Tower, I emphasize, our situation is critical. Consumption is 30% above planned and increasing. We need that authorization." Flight omitted. We understand your concern, but the data we're receiving from your transponder shows all systems normal. You may have a failure in measuring instruments. We recommend proceeding to destination, where we'll have complete maintenance crew. I looked at Tyler. His eyes reflected the same disbelief I felt. They weren't believing us. They thought it was paranoia, excessive caution, maybe even our misinterpretation. But I knew how to read those instruments. I'd been doing it for decades, and those numbers didn't lie. Tyler, how much time do we have? I asked quietly, so the conversation stayed just between us. He frantically typed on the flight computer, cross-referencing consumption data, speed, distance. The answer came in seconds, but seemed like an eternity. At current rate, about 90 minutes before we reach critical reserve level. We're 4 hours from destination. 4 hours of flight, 90 minutes of fuel beyond predicted consumption. The math was cruel and unequivocal. That's when the second problem presented itself. A line of storms was forming exactly on our route, further ahead. It wasn't in the weather briefing forecasts. The radar showed cumulonimbus cells developing rapidly, reaching altitudes that would force significant deviations. Deviations that would consume even more fuel we didn't have. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Tyler asked, looking alternately at the fuel gauge and weather radar. I was. And the conclusion was terrifying. We needed to make a decision now, before all options disappeared. But what decision? Disobeying air traffic control and forcing an unauthorized diversion was a serious violation, possibly the end of my career. But continuing on the current route was mathematically impossible. And there was a third variable that nobody besides the two of us knew yet. Just ahead, our planned route passed near a mountain range in a coastal region. If we needed to descend due to fuel shortage earlier than planned, those mountains would become a deadly barrier. Captain, the lead flight attendant's voice sounded on the intercom. We have a passenger feeling unwell at the back of the aircraft. Appears to be cardiac. There's a doctor on board already attending, but he's asking if we can land soon. Of course, because one critical variable wasn't enough. Now we also had a medical emergency. Thank you for the information. Keep me updated on his condition, I responded, trying not to let the tension show. I disconnected the intercom and looked at the dark horizon ahead. Somewhere out there, beyond the moonlit clouds, beyond the invisible ocean, was the continent, and between us and safety, a series of obstacles that seemed to conspire to make the impossible even more impossible. Richard, we need to declare emergency, Tyler said. We need authority to make our own decisions. He was right. But declaring emergency meant admitting the situation was out of control. It meant activating protocols that would involve rescue teams, investigations, headlines. It meant 418 people would know they were in real danger. And it meant that if I was wrong about the severity of the situation, my career would end humiliatingly. But if I was right and didn't declare, well, then there wouldn't be a career for anyone to worry about. Tower, this is flight, omitted. We're declaring fuel emergency. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Mayday. Requesting immediate authorization for diversion and priority to nearest viable airport. There was tense silence on the frequency. Then the controller's voice returned, now with a completely different tone, focused, urgent, professional. Flight omitted. Emergency confirmed. All aircraft on frequency. Give way. Flight omitted. Report fuel remaining, souls on board and intentions. Tower. Fuel remaining calculated at approximately 70 minutes of flight at current consumption. 418 souls on board, including crew. Requesting direct vector to nearest coastal airport with capability to receive wide-body aircraft. While transmitting this information, Tyler was already reprogramming the navigation computer, searching for options. But the geographic reality was unforgiving. The nearest coastal airport was behind us, would require turning back, burning more fuel. The next one in the direction we were flying was on the continent, on the other side of that mountain range I so feared. Richard, look at this, Tyler pointed to the navigation radar screen. There's a military airport here on the coast, 60 miles ahead. Long runway emergency equipment. We can make it in 22 minutes if we start descent now. I looked where he indicated. It really was an option, but it was a military base. Getting there without prior authorization could create a complicated international situation. On the other hand, it was our best real chance of landing safely before the tanks completely dried up. Tower. We're altering course to military base code. Omitted. It's our only viable option with remaining fuel. Flight. Omitted. Stand by. We're coordinating with military authorities. Maintain listening watch. Seconds dragged like hours. Every passing moment was fuel draining from the tanks. I looked at the gauge. Consumption rate had increased another 5%. Whatever was causing this was getting worse. Tyler, initiate descent. We're going to economize all possible fuel. Reduce power to minimum necessary. He nodded and began executing. The aircraft initiated a smooth but steady descent. I felt that peculiar sensation in my stomach that always accompanies altitude changes. Behind us, 418 people probably noticed too, some perhaps waking from sleep, others looking out windows trying to understand why we were descending over the ocean. The lead flight attendant called me again. Captain, passengers are starting to ask what's happening. What should I say? Good question. What do you tell hundreds of people when the truth is there may not be enough fuel to reach the ground? Tell them we had a route change for technical reasons and we're descending to an alternate airport as a precaution. Ask everyone to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. And prepare the cabin discreetly for a possible emergency landing. There was a pause. She understood what I wasn't saying. Understood, Captain. The tower's voice returned. Flight omitted. Military authorities have approved your emergency landing. Direct vector authorized, absolute priority. Ground emergencies being activated. We advise weather conditions at location with reduced visibility due to coastal fog. Crosswind 15 knots. Runway 35 right available, 10,500 feet. Report when on final approach. Fog. Crosswind. Of course, because we needed more complications. Tower received, proceeding. I initiated the briefing with Tyler. We reviewed approach procedures, minimum altitudes, speeds. But in the back of my mind, one question hammered insistently. Will the fuel last? We passed over the coastline. Below, sparse lights from villages and small towns. To the right, dark silhouettes of mountains cut against the night sky. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. If the engines failed now, there'd be nowhere to go. Not over that terrain. The fuel gauge showed numbers that made my heart race. We were at minimum reserve. Any variation, any unforeseen event, and we wouldn't make it. Approach, flight, omitted. 40 miles out, descending to 5,000 feet. Request vectors for ILS approach runway 35 right. Flight omitted, approved. Fly heading 320, descend and maintain 3,000 feet initially. Report visual with runway. While Tyler flew, I monitored all systems obsessively. Engines continued with normal parameters, but the fuel was running out before my eyes. I did a quick mental calculation. We had maybe 15, maximum 20 minutes before complete failure, and we were still almost 25 minutes from the runway. The math simply didn't add up, unless a miracle happened, or I made a decision that violated all standard safety procedures. Tyler, I'm going to do something I technically shouldn't. I'm going to maintain power at absolute minimum, below recommended for the flight phase. We're going to use the descent to gain speed and glide whenever possible. It's risky, but it's our only chance. He looked at me, processing what I was saying. Flying with power below recommended meant that if anything went wrong, we wouldn't have margin for recovery. But it was still better than running out of fuel. Do whatever's necessary, he said simply. And there, in that moment, I knew I'd chosen the right co-pilot for that night. I reduced power more than any manual would recommend. The aircraft responded. Descent rate increased slightly. We were essentially gliding, using gravity to carry us forward, engines just maintaining minimum lift. We passed 15,000 feet, 10,000, 7,000. The military base appeared on radar, runway lights not yet visible through the fog. Flight omitted. You're 15 miles out. You can reduce to 2,000 feet. Runway ahead of you, 12 o'clock, 10 miles. I looked forward. Nothing but fog. Visibility was worse than reported. We'd have to trust the instruments completely. Altitude was decreasing. 5,000 feet, 4,000, 3,000. The mountainous terrain was dangerously close. Ground proximity alerts began sounding, that high-pitched, insistent tone every pilot fears. Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. The automated voice of the alert system filled the cabin. But I couldn't climb. Climbing would consume the fuel we didn't have. I needed to trust the instruments, the approach, the geometry of descent. "Silencing ground alert," I announced, and pressed the button. The sound ceased, but the danger remained. It just wasn't reminding us of it every second anymore. 2,500 feet. 2,000. Sweat ran down my forehead. My hands gripped the controls with unnecessary force. Controlled breathing. Focus. Confidence. "Runway in sight," Tyler shouted. And there it was. Through the layers of fog, the military runway lights emerged like a bright line of salvation. Nothing ever looked so beautiful to me. "Approach flight, omitted visual with runway, request landing." "Flight omitted, cleared to land, runway 35 right, wind 320 knots, emergency cruise positioned, 1,500 feet, 1,000. The fuel gauge was in the critical red zone. At any moment the engines could fail, but we were almost there. Just a few more seconds. 500 feet. Full landing configuration. Flaps extended, gear down and locked. Runway growing in the windscreen. 100 feet. 50. The crosswind pushed the aircraft, demanding constant corrections. 30, 20, 10. The main wheels touched the asphalt with a dull, comforting impact. The most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Thrust reversers engaged, brakes applied, aircraft decelerating, and finally stopping. "Cut engines," I ordered. Tyler executed, and only then did I allow myself to breathe. That's when everything became silent in an almost surreal way. I looked at the fuel gauge. It showed less than 3 minutes of flight remaining in the tanks. 3 minutes. If we'd had to go around, if anything had delayed the landing by more than 3 minutes, we'd be falling from the sky at that exact moment. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Fire trucks, ambulances, military vehicles. The lead flight attendant opened the cockpit door. "Captain, passengers want to know if they can now." "Tell them yes. But we're deplaning via stairs. There's no jet bridge here." She nodded and left. I sat there, hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline. Tyler looked at me. "That was—" he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. There were no adequate words. "Yeah," I agreed. It was. It took 2 hours to organize buses to transport passengers to the military base terminal, another 3 hours until a replacement aircraft arrived to continue their journey. During all that time, investigators and technicians examined our plane, trying to understand what had caused the abnormal fuel consumption. Tyler and I gave our statements, explained every decision, every calculation. Some looked at us with suspicion, as if we'd exaggerated the danger. Others with respect and understanding. It was only the next morning that the answer came. A fuel flow control valve from one of the tanks had partially failed. It wasn't an external leak. Fuel was being diverted between tanks inefficiently, causing much higher consumption by the main engines, while auxiliary tanks weren't adequately feeding the system. It was a rare failure, documented only 3 times in the history of that aircraft model, and all 3 previous times had resulted in emergency landings. We were the 4th crew to face this. The difference is we were the first with 418 passengers on board. The chief engineer who investigated the case found me at the hotel where the company accommodated us. He was an older man, grey hair, tired eyes of someone who'd seen a lot. "Captain Richard," he extended his hand, "I reviewed all your calculations, all your decisions. You did everything right. Better than right, actually. You saved 418 lives yesterday." I shook his hand, but the words didn't bring the relief I expected. "I almost didn't believe it when I saw how much fuel remained when you landed," he continued. 3 minutes. You literally flew the plane to the last possible drop." "It was more luck than skill," I replied honestly. He shook his head. "Luck is falling into the problem. Skill is getting out of it. And you, Captain, got out of a situation that most pilots wouldn't even know was happening until it was too late." We spent the morning reviewing the events. Every radio transmission, every altitude change, every decision. He showed me charts, simulations of how everything could have ended if we'd continued on the original route, if we'd tried for the Azores, if we'd climbed instead of descending. In all those simulations, the aircraft ran out of fuel over the ocean or over the mountains. In all of them, there were no survivors. "What impresses me," he said, "is that you made the decision to declare emergency when everyone was saying you were wrong, when controls said the data showed no problem, when they denied your diversion. You trusted your instruments, your experience, and insisted. I had no choice, I replied. The numbers didn't lie. Ah, but you did have a choice, he corrected. You could have believed them and not yourself. You could have doubted your own instruments. You could have waited a bit longer before declaring emergency. And in each of those choices, the result would be catastrophic. That afternoon, I received a call from the company. It was the operations director. Richard, I want you to know we're proud of your conduct. You acted exactly as we expect our captains to act, prioritizing safety above all, even when that means making difficult decisions. Thank you, sir, I responded, finally feeling some relief. There'll be a formal investigation, of course, he continued. It's standard procedure, but don't worry, from the reports we've already received, it's clear you did everything right. In fact, we've already talked with some of the passengers. They're asking to thank you personally. And so it happened. The next day, before flying back home, I met with a group of passengers from that flight. There was everything. The executive who was in first class, the mother traveling with 2 small children, the student starting his exchange program, the elderly couple returning from vacation. Captain, said the executive, shaking my hand firmly, we didn't know exactly what was happening up there, but we felt something was wrong, and you brought us home. Thank you. The mother had tears in her eyes. My kids barely understood what happened. For them it was an adventure, but I knew. I felt the fear in the flight attendant's voice when she prepared us for landing. And you? You saved us. What do you say to that? How do you respond when someone thanks you for doing your job but knowing any mistake would have cost their lives? I just nodded, trying to maintain composure. We just did our job, the entire crew. You were lucky to have an excellent team that day. It wasn't luck, said the elderly man, speaking for the first time. He was a short man with glasses, heavy accent suggesting Portuguese wasn't his native language. Luck doesn't make you take the right decisions under pressure. Luck doesn't make you trust yourself when everyone says you're wrong. That's character, that's competence, that's what we expect from whoever is in command. Those words stayed with me. More than any official report, more than any company recognition. Because they came from who really mattered, the people who were back there, trusting that I knew what I was doing. I returned to work 3 weeks later, after completing all the debriefings and psychological evaluations the company required. My first flight was tense. I checked fuel instruments obsessively, calculated and recalculated reserves. Tyler, who was with me again, noticed. It'll pass, he said. The first time back is always difficult after something like that. He was right. Gradually, flight after flight, confidence returned. But something had changed in me. I looked at those indicators differently now. Every flight, every passenger, every decision had a weight I didn't fully perceive before. It wasn't fear, it was respect. Respect for the gravity of the responsibility we carry every time we close that cockpit door. 6 months later, I received a letter. It was from the passenger who was feeling unwell that night, the cardiac case. He wrote to tell me he survived, that he was well cared for at the military hospital, that he recovered completely. But what marked me most, the letter said, wasn't the care I received. It was knowing afterwards that while I was fighting for my life back there, you were fighting for all our lives up front, and you won. Thank you for giving me the chance to see my grandchildren grow up. I keep that letter to this day. On difficult days, when routine seems monotonous, when flying seems like just another job, I reread it, and I remember. The official investigation concluded that the valve failure was undetectable in the pre-flight check. There was nothing we could have done to prevent it. The manufacturer issued an airworthiness directive, modifying inspection procedures. The company implemented additional real-time monitoring of fuel systems. Other companies followed. Changes born from that night, from those terrible minutes over the Atlantic. What did I learn? That aviation isn't about blindly following rules. It's about understanding the principles behind the rules and knowing when the situation requires you to go beyond them. It's about trusting your instruments, your experience, yourself, especially when others doubt. It's about making difficult decisions, knowing each one can be the difference between life and death. But mainly I learned that every time we sit in that captain's seat, we're not just piloting an aircraft. We're carrying stories. The executive with important morning meeting, the mother taking children to meet grandparents, the student full of dreams, the couple celebrating decades together, the man fighting against a weak heart, each with their story, their hopes, their fears. and all trusting we'll do the impossible to bring them home safely. Today, when I close my eyes, I still see that fuel gauge in the red zone. I still feel the tension of that moment when the runway emerged through the fog. I still hear the ground alerts sounding as we descended between the mountains. But I also see the runway lights that meant salvation. I hear the sound of wheels touching the asphalt. I feel the relief of knowing 418 people would continue their lives because that night, everything worked out. Aviation is a constant dance with the impossible. Sometimes the music changes mid-performance. The lights go out, the stage moves, and you need to keep dancing, find your way, bring everyone home. That's what we did that night. It wasn't perfect. It was desperate, terrifying, a razor's edge between success and disaster. But it was enough. Next time you board a flight, look at the cockpit. Maybe you'll only see people doing their job, following procedures, flying on autopilot. But know that each of those pilots carries stories like this. Moments when the impossible knocked on the door and they needed to find a way to transform it into possible. Moments when safety margins disappeared and everything depended on decisions made in fractions of a second. And most of the time, you'll never know. Because our mission is exactly that, to make what's extraordinarily difficult seem easy, to make what's technically miraculous seem routine, to bring you home flight after flight, day after day, year after year, so you can live your stories. This is my story. The story of a night when 418 souls depended on choices that defied logic, on math that didn't add up, on trusting the impossible, and how sometimes against all odds the impossible happens. So next time you're sitting back there enjoying your movie or sleeping peacefully, remember, up front someone's watching, someone's doing calculations, someone's making decisions you'll never know were necessary, and that person will do the impossible to get you home, because that's what we do. No matter the cost, no matter the pressure, no matter if nobody believes, we bring you home. Always. If you enjoyed this real story from the skies, subscribe to the Black Box channel. Every week we bring new accounts from pilots who faced the impossible up there. Leave your comment telling us what you'd do in this situation, and hit the bell to not miss the next flight. Until then, safe skies for everyone.